Okay guys, today's step 3 of the Kytte website build, and just going to run you through a few things we'll go through in this lesson. We'll set up a basic link up to a Google font, a custom font, and show you how to use that. Then we'll start building the bulk of the hero section. So that's where we've got the image and the headline and a little button there. And we'll go through the whole problem solving approach to it, because as you'll see and you'll pick up in CSS, there's quite a few different ways of doing the same thing. So we'll just approach a few of those as you get your head around it. Then we'll apply some background images, and the last thing we'll do, we'll style up a button. So that will pretty much complete our hero section, and you would have learned a lot in terms of how we structure the page and how we use different methods. Okay, so let's get stuck straight into it. I got my desktop here, the project folder, which has our index and styles sheets, and our image folder there as well. So I'm going to open this up in Atom so I can work on it. On the Mac here, I'll just drag and drop it on there. On Windows, you go File, Open Folder. And as we've seen before, we get up on the sidebar here with all our files. And if you don't see that, you can go Command the pipe key, which is the backslash, I think, on Windows, yeah. And that shows and hides that, which is quite handy. So let's open up our index file and our styles file. So it's obviously the two main files we're always working on. So let's see where we left off last time. So in order to see what we're actually working on, obviously we need to open up our file in Chrome so we can actually see it. So let's see. There we go. So last time we got the logo and basically the header done with our navigation. So that's great. Cool. So we're now going to build this hero section here. Let me show you in Photoshop the design we're going from. There we go. So yeah, we're basically building this area here today, and teach you the methods to do that. So I'm going to hide that, and the first thing we really want to do is, before we go any further, I want to bring in that custom font, because as you start building the layout, obviously the font sizes of headings and things like that will change generally the size of boxes and things, you know, and what you'll find is different fonts have slightly different sizes. So I always find it's just good practice to include the font as early as possible in your build. You don't want to go building the whole site then include the font at the end. You can, but I just find that it's easier to work with the custom font you're actually going to be using, so at least you can get your dimensions and things right from the start. So to do that, the easiest way really is just to use Google Fonts. There's a few other different ones like Kytte and so forth, but we'll use Google Fonts in this case because it's free. And all it really does is it just brings in as a style sheet. So it's just an extra style sheet we include here, and that really takes care of it. So to do that, let's head back to our Photoshop file and see what font we need first, because all the other fonts seem to be pretty standard. I mean, this is something like Arial, or Avant-Garde, that's alright. We can use something like Arial or Helvetica for the time being for that. But this font in particular, this is the custom one which is used throughout. So as I select that, obviously Photoshop's asking me that we don't have that font, but I'm not going to install it just yet. But the key thing I'm looking for here is the name of it. So I know that this font is now called Nova Flat. So cool, I'm going to go to Google Fonts, see if we can find it. So I'll just type in Google Fonts. There we go. It's really straightforward to use, guys. So yeah, pretty lucky these days with what we've got. So I'm going to type in here Nova Flat. There it is. Cool. That's the font. So what you do is you click Add to Collection, and it's saying, hey, you've got one font family here. And basically got these three buttons here, you know, to choose, review, and use. So we're pretty happy with that. We want to use it, so we click that, and it's just a real simple process. The first step is kind of guiding you through. It's saying, hey, you know, what styles do you want to include? Because I mean, for every font, you know, you might have like the normal weight, bold, bold italic, thin, really light. So you might have a whole bunch of different weights there to choose from. And some fonts might come with, say, 10 or 15 different weights. It gets quite crazy sometimes. And every single weight you include is going to make the file size much, much bigger. So it's just something really important to be aware of. In this case, we're pretty lucky. It's just got the one weight, and you'll see on the right-hand side here, it's giving us a page load of 38, which is in that green zone. So that's probably where we want to keep it. As soon as you start getting up in the orange and red, it's, you know, it's probably going to work out to be quite a large file, and that's going to slow down the page load quite significantly. So it's definitely something to be aware of. In this case, we just got the one, so that's fine. Second step is saying what characters you want to include. There's only one set here, which is the Latin characters, so that's perfectly fine. And this is the important part here. This is how we actually use it. So it's saying here, all you got to do is just copy and paste this into your HTML file. So click it, Command C to copy. I'm going to go in here, and so you see here we've got our normalize, which has brought in all our, if you remember that, that brings in all our kind of browser reset, the kind of defaults. It kind of makes all the browsers cooperate and start off from the very same baseline. And then we include our styles on top of that. So really the font is, yeah, just one kind of one we bring at the start here. See what I mean? So we bring in our fonts, bring in our normalize, then we bring in our styles. And really simple as pasting it in. So it's bringing it in online from the fonts, Google Fonts URL there. It's telling us it's a style sheet. You see here the order's a little bit messed up. They've just put href first, and it doesn't really matter as long as it's all there. So cool, that's our font. We can save that. And then if we go back to Google Fonts, to actually use it, we need to make sure that that's the family name, the font family name we use in our CSS. So let's do that now. Let's copy that. Let's go to our style sheet, and we're pretty much setting, go to Photoshop here, this font is only really used for headings, isn't it? If you scroll throughout the page, I mean the rest of the fonts are going to be standard in terms of the body fonts. So we really only want to use this for heading tags, you know, like H1, H2, H3, and so forth. So let's set that up. And headings are really something you set up at the very start of your CSS file, because it's going to be inherited throughout the rest. So let's go under here underneath body, and let's set up a new thing here for headings. So we want all the headings. So we'll grab the H1, and then we're going to do a group selector here. So we're going to actually select a whole bunch at once. H2, H3, sorry, H4, H5 will do. So what we're doing there is we're basically grabbing all these objects in one hit and saying, hey, just apply this one rule to all of them. I'll just paste it in from Google Fonts, and there it is. There's our font family, and we save that. And let's go back to our index. And right now we don't have any H1s on the page, so let's just put one under here as a test to see if it's actually worked. Now this is a heading 1. Close that off, save it, go back to my Chrome, let's refresh. Cool, excellent, there we go. That's the font. It's all working perfectly fine. Alright, so now we've got that done, let's just delete that, and that's all out the way, so I can close Google Fonts now. Really simple, right? You know, it's not really over complex, it's just a simple case of including the actual link to the font itself, and then in your style sheet just set what the font family is, and the rest is all kind of done for you. Really easy. So alright, let's go down to actually building our hero section here. I call it the hero, it's just a term which is pass over from the advertising industry. It's just because usually, I mean, this is your header really, isn't it? At the very top here, it's the header of the page in terms of the navigation and the logo. And then most websites will have a header like that, and then you'll have some kind of section here, which is, you know, like the big promo usually has like a big image of, you know, the target audience or the product and some big headline. So I just kind of call it the hero because it kind of applies to that. So we just want to go down from there to there. So let's get started with that. And as we've seen before, every time we build something, we always start off in our HTML, because the HTML is the whole structure, and then we do the styles afterwards. So we're in our index.html file, let's go underneath our header, and let's create a new area. So again, like we've seen before, like you know, in terms of the tags used, we actually have a header tag specifically for the header, which is kind of handy. But you know, we could use a div, or we could use a section. In this case, I'm going to use a section, because it is a whole new section in itself. And obviously, in order for us to do any kind of styling, we need to give it some kind of name, a class name. So I'm going to call this the hero. There we go. I'm going to go underneath, close that off, and there we go. Another quick way to do this in Atom actually is, instead of me actually typing the arrows out manually like this, the tags, I can actually just go section and then go tab, and see how it automatically fills it in for me. So Atom's pretty handy like that. Just a little time saver trick. Alright, so we made our hero section. And inside of that, we are going to make, let's have a look here. So we've got a heading 1 tag there, really. I mean, that is the main heading of the whole page. So let's put that as a heading 1. I'm just going to jump in there and copy and paste the text. For now, let's just do a replacement font, not to worry about that. So let's put a heading 1 here. There we go. And you see it's already got the line break in there as well. There we go, cool. Sometimes there's some hidden characters in there when you get a line break, just to be aware of. Nothing too major. Alright. There we go. So there's our heading 1. And underneath that we have a button, don't we? Obviously it's a clickable button, so we're going to use that an anchor tag for that. So we'll jump in here, do an anchor tag, href. This is going to be linking nowhere for the time being. And our title attribute is which is what appears when the mouse hovers over the link. So we'll say, you know, check this out, or check it out, I should say. There we go. Check it out. Close that and go check it out. So there's my button there. Pretty happy with that. Cool. Alright, so let's save that for now. And obviously if we go back to our Chrome, refresh, we're not going to see much apart from just the heading and the link. But we've got our kind of structure there set up. But one thing I'm going to do is, you can see throughout the entire site, I mean right now this would just create this section here, full 100% width. Because as we've learnt before, that sections and div tags and they're all display block. And display block means that it will appear on its own line. It's pretty greedy. It doesn't let any other element appear on the same line, and also always fills 100% width. So we know that. But you'll notice is that throughout the entire design here is that we've got these areas which go 100% width for the page, but really the content area is always only about that wide, isn't it? It's about 950 or so. And so really we want to wrap these inside its own div, so we can keep all the content inside its own container there. And the beauty of doing this is that if we give this a common class, so this one's called container and this one's called container, for example, give them all the same class name, we can set the width once and it gets inherited for all of them. And the beauty of that is that, for example, we might set this width, for a desktop size computer, a browser, and then we'll set a custom width for tablet and then for mobile. So at least we have really easy control on our CSS to change it once and it will change it everywhere. So let me just go in and just show you how to do that. You'll see the more of the effect of that a bit later on. So I'm going to go in here right now and make a new container inside of these things to wrap them. Oops, I'm going to go class, and I'm going to actually call it container. And obviously you want to tab it in so the relationship here is all accurate. I'm going to close that off. There we go. Cool, that's kind of set up now. So we've got so anything inside, basically any area inside our div, which is our main content area really, well, anything that kind of fits inside there, if we all have that wrapped inside a div called container, then our life becomes a lot easier. So let's put some styling first to make sure we've got this hero section working. So let's go to our styles, and we'll see here, that's all our styles we did from before. Let's go to the very bottom, and we're going to create a new one. So we're going to go section.hero. And this is one thing I always do as I'm starting to build my site for the first time with my CSS. I don't really put all the background images and make it look all too fancy just yet. I usually use some nice bright colors so I can see which area is which. So I'm going to say here background is, let's say yellow. So yellow background. Save that. Now when I go back and refresh Chrome, cool. Okay, we can now see that that's actually where the hero section is. And I can see here you've got this little gap. So it seems strange, doesn't it? Because I mean, really, if I right click and inspect here in Chrome, let's have a look here. That's where our hero section starts. And you can see there's that gap. So there's our header stops and starts there, and there it is. But there's that white gap. So where's it coming from? Oh, excuse that. That's just the dog going. She's not trained in HTML, so sorry about that. Let's have a look. If we scroll in to section and expand that, here we go. As soon as I've hovered over the H1 tag, you see now that orange section appears where that white gap is. So that's telling us that, and we know the orange sections that appear there are margins. So if I click the H1, you'll see that it's coming from our normalized CSS file. It's actually put a margin on the top of 0.67 EMs, which is this gap space here. So I can see that gap's actually coming from my H1. But it's really important to be able to jump into my inspector here and not really guess. I don't want to go back and forth from my CSS file and try and figure out what's going on. I could just use the inspector to just straight away tell me what's happening. I could just go through, hover over my tags, and immediately I'll see, oh, it's coming from the H1. So really, I can see what Normalize is trying to do. It's trying to just make sure all the headings basically have a margin at the top and bottom of that value, which is a nice starting point for most designs. But I don't really like having a margin on the top for this reason. So I'm going to go through in my CSS file, and just like we did for all our headings, we set the font. I want to also, for every single heading, I don't want to have any margins on the top. Okay, so I'm going to go margin top is nothing. Save that, go back, refresh. Cool. All right, I'm much happy with that now. So there we go. That's all kind of sorted. So that's my, if I hover my hero section here, there we go. So that's the whole area there with background color of yellow. So what I want to do now is, I want to make it look a little bit closer to what's here. So I'm going to set a height manually on my hero right now. And we'll see, we'll take this off a bit later. but I just want to put it on here right now so I can get a bit more of an accurate look of what it's going to look like. Let's just set it to 300 pixels. Save, refresh. There we go. Cool, so that's got a bit closer. And as we saw before, all the content regions are always at a kind of fixed width, aren't they? They never go 100%. There's always a nice, nice bit of margin on left and right. So to do that, we want to actually set the width of our container div, which is here. And just to recap, this is our container here. So you let div class container. So we're now going to set a width for this and a background color so we can actually see what's going on. It's really going to help us. So I'm going to just go here, dot container. I could have gone div dot container. I don't really need to be too specific because who knows, I might want to use that container class on something else a bit later on. So we could be just happily get away with just dot container for now. And we're going to set the width to 950 pixels for this time being, a fixed width. And then underneath I'm going to go background. Let's see, I want to make this orange. So now when I go to Chrome, I'll be able to see exactly where everything is. Ah, cool. There we go. Excellent. So we have our section hero, and that's yellow as we know, and inside that we've got a container, and we've got our width set to 950. So no matter how big I make the browser window, hang on a minute, my screen is going quite orange. I've got Flux installed. Turn it off. Okay, that's a bit better. All right. So yeah, no matter how big I make my browser, you see our content area is always fixed at 950 width. And this is kind of handy for the time being. We'll show you how we can change this later on, but at least that way I've got full control of the width of this container. So, but you notice that it's kind of sitting off to the left, isn't it? I mean, it is a display block element, so as we hover over it, there it is. It'll always appear on its own line, which means that although we've got the width set to 950 here, we've got the extra gap, nothing will ever go there because it's a display block. Just something to be aware of. But in this case, we want it to align in the center, And the way we do that, if you guys remember from the homework, is done by the margin auto. So we set the margin, and the first value is the top and bottom. So we're going to set 0 because we don't want anything to do with the top and bottom margin. That's fine as it is. And we want the left and right origin to be auto. And that's as easy as it is. Come back, refresh. There you go. As I hover over, you'll see that these areas on the left and right here go orange. And that's telling me they're margins. That's all automatic, isn't it? Now, if I make my browser bigger and smaller, they will always be centered in the middle. So this is great. This is what we want. Getting much closer now. Cool. So what else do we have? Let's see. So we've got our heading and our button in there. Obviously, right now our button is just where'd you go? It's just a nice simple link. So we haven't styled that to a button. We'll do that at the very end, because as you'll see, it's more important for us to build the structure and get everything working properly first. So the next thing we want to put in here, the biggest element, is this Spaceman guy. So let's zoom in, and we want to export him as an image with a transparent background. So I'm going to click him. I just went Command Alt Control click, and on Windows you just Control click, and it'll automatically select the layer, which is pretty handy. So there's our dude there. We're going to right click him, and if you're using the latest version of Photoshop, which you probably should be, makes your life a lot easier, you'll see there's this really cool option here called Quick Export as PNG. So we're going to do that. It's going to ask us where to put it. I've got on desktop here, inside my Kytte folder, and there's one called Images, and I'm just going to call this guy Spaceman.png. So always make sure you don't have any spaces, so I can't have Spaceman with a space like that, and don't use capitals like that. Just keep it always lowercase, and if you are going to use a space, use a dash. And these are just important conventions to stick to at the very start of your career, and it makes your whole life a lot easier. At least that way you're not doing any guesswork later on. So let's save that. Cool, and there it is. So in my images folder, I've got my logo, and I've also got my Spaceman. Great, so let's go into our HTML now and put him in there. So if we go back under here, there's our container, we've got our H1 and our link. Cool, so underneath that, I'm going to put in, use the image tag, src for source. We know it's in a subfolder called images, spaceman.png. And always remember to put your alt tag, and just remember your alt tag is a very basic description of what the image is. This helps people if they have images disabled in the browser, for people, for example, who are visually impaired, so it's really helpful. So I'm just going to put here Spaceman. Yeah, it's always very important to do that. And we'll close up our tag. But we're also going to add a class, because we can't really style this guy unless we give him some kind of name, so we can actually do a selector for him in CSS. So we'll just call him Spaceman, all lowercase like that. Okay, go back to our Chrome, refresh, make sure we've actually done it properly. Cool, excellent. And as we'll see here, we inspect just to see where everything is. We've got our container, got our H1, got our link down there, and we've got our image tag. And what you'll see here, we've got our link. See, our link's gone right to the bottom because the anchor tag, our link here, and our image, these objects both have display inline, naturally by default. The browser always interprets that. So, and just remember, when an object is in line, it always appears, they all appear on the same line next to each other if there's enough space. So that's important. So these get seen as being on the same line. So therefore, this one's obviously a lot bigger, which has made the line a lot higher. And therefore, they're always aligned to the bottom, which is why the link is at the bottom here. So they're on the same line there. So what we want to do is we want to get this space dude over here, really, don't we? So how can we do that? Well, first we want to make some styles, for this image. We actually want to be able to control him in CSS. So let's copy that class name, go back to our styles, and let's see, we've got our hero down there. We're going to come down and we're going to make a class for him. We're going to go image.spaceman. And we're going to say, the easiest way to get him over the right hand side here is to float him. So we're going to say float to right, save. Let's see what that did. Refresh. Cool, well he is floated to the right there, but you notice now that our container div, which has that orange background color, is now gone back to how it was before. It can't really seem to detect that the space dude is in there. Really it should be big, shouldn't it? It should be right down to the bottom here. But what's happening is this is what the problem is with floats, is that when you have an object, for example, here our image floating inside a container, as soon as you float it, the container, for some strange reason, can't figure out the height of the container. It's just the bit of a setback with floats. And you'll see in the slide notes have a little demonstration of this. But basically, the container can't figure out the height. So as soon as an element is floated, it's kind of rebellious. It kind of sits on its own layer and doesn't really follow the document flow as we'd expect it would with elements like this. So, but the way to overcome that, we have a very simple method, and you'll find back in the day we used a whole bunch of complex clear fixes and things like that. But it's we've got a pretty easy hack for that these days. We actually got a little bit of CSS called overflow. So we want to put it on our container, don't we? Because this is the orange section here, which is having the problem. So we want to go under there, and all we have to do is go overflow auto. What that does is it's going to fix the problem. There we go. So now it knows that it can actually see the height of that. But we'll see overflow auto has its own set of issues, but we'll see that a bit later when we go through some other methods. But for now, it's working pretty good for us. Excellent. So we can see how that's kind of working. The next thing we want to do really is, let's have a look here. We want to style this heading, and well, basically this area over here, to have some kind of margin on the padding at the top, because it shouldn't be sticking right at the top there. But let's see. So let's go in there and let's have a look. If we go to our H1 tag, which is here, we could set a margin on the top, couldn't we? But the thing is with the margin on the top for the H1 is, later on if we come back and we decide we don't want this to be a H1, maybe it's a H2 instead, we've now lost our styling, haven't we? But in reality, really, let's step back and look at this and think, this area here with our heading and our link, they really are kind of grouped in their own section. So if later on we want to add like a paragraph in there and maybe 3 or 4 other little buttons, this whole area here really should be in its own, grouped up in its own div, really. Similar to how we group layers in Photoshop. If these are all related to each other and this is over here as separate, we should probably group these up. And you'll see why, because yeah, if we were to add the padding on here, it would only be applied to that H1. And it just creates a lot more messy CSS later down the track. So it's just better to think ahead of the future. And let's wrap these up. So I'm going to wrap these in a div now. And I'm going to give them a class. Let's just call it headline, because it's really like the headline introduction, isn't it? So there we go. And now the H1 tag and the link are child elements of that. So we're going to tab them in to make sure all our tabbing is done correctly. And we'll end up our div. So now we have a new grouping, a new div in there called headline. And now, I'm going to just copy the name of that class, go into our CSS, and we could do some styling for it. I'm just going to put it before the Spaceman, because it does come before. It's nice to keep your order of elements here in logical order. So we know that's a class, so we put a dot in front, and we're going to say, for now, let's just give it a background color of green or something. Again, it's always just good to use these colors here, so we can go back to Chrome, refresh, and see where everything is. Ah, excellent. So what we've noticed here is that, and this is something we might not have been able to see before had we not put a background color, is that, see, this element spans all the way across the page? So what that means is, if we were to, let's go back to our Photoshop file here. If we do want to add in this padding or this margin at the top here, it's actually going to push the whole Spaceman down, and I'll show you. So let's go in here and let's just use padding. We're going to say padding top of, let's just say 80 pixels. I think it's about 80 pixels or so. There we go. Let's go to Chrome and refresh. So this is looking good for this area here, but again, see, like, it's going to push our Spaceman down constantly. So even if we were to add, more, say, like a paragraph text onto this link, this green area would get taller and taller, and as a result, our Spaceman would always go underneath it. So that's not ideal. That's not really what we want. We've got him floating over to the right, but this headline area in green really should be a narrower width and kind of over to the left, shouldn't it? So let's see what we can do there. Probably the easiest way we could do that is with a float again. I mean, we've got our Spaceman floating to the right, so let's float this to the left and see what that does. Float left, come back, refresh. Ah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? That's floating to the left, and it's kind of already made an automatic width for us. And that's what happens with floats, that when you do float something, its width will then be automatic depending on how much content's there. So in this case, that's a pretty good kind of scenario. We've got a headline over here, and our Spaceman's got enough space to be on the right here. But here's where the trick is. So if you were just to stick with that for now, you'd be pretty good. But what happens is the width of this is going to always be automatic depending on how much content. So if we were to add some more extra content here, so let's write some dummy words. So this is just simulating, if the client came along and put some more text in here. Let's save, go back to Chrome and refresh. Ah, see? So now the width has had to go 100% because it's, the content's too long. And then we've got the same problem again. So the float has worked, but we've got the problem of the width. So actually, let's keep that text in there for now. So we actually do need to set the width of this headline div manually. So let's go in here and let's say a width of, you see some percentages, let's go 60%. And remember, the width of the object is always relevant to its container. And we know our container here is set to 950, so it'll basically be 60% of this orange width. So let's refresh. Okay, that's getting there, it's closer. We now know this width is manually controlled, but it's still a little bit too much, isn't it? So instead of us going back and forth in Atom and Chrome, we can actually just right click and use our inspector here to do it live on the page. So let's click our headline, there we go. And there's our 60% width. If I click inside there and use my up and down arrow keys, see? So now I can get a number which is going to work. So let's say 58% instead. There we go. 58%, go back, save and refresh. Cool. So we've got a much more desirable situation here now, don't we? Much more desirable. But here's where another problem lies. Our space dude right here, his width is set just via the pixel width of whatever the image is. So the problem is that this situation here works fine for now, but what happens in 2 weeks later when the client comes back and decides, our space guy here needs to be, I don't know, holding a big, like baseball bat or something like that, who knows? And therefore the width for the image will now be out here, so the width will be larger. So, and what will happen is that will then make him too big to fit there and he'll have to go underneath. So he realizes that we can't really rely on the natural width of this object. We really have to set the width of this Spaceman manually, don't we? So, yeah, like for example, if I was coming here and just set it manually here, width to say, 400 pixels and save. See what I mean? He's now too big to fit there. If I inspect and hover over, you'll see the area of the image. It's just that little bit too big. If I was to make him a little bit smaller, see, he fits, but if he's a little bit larger, we're going to get a problem like that. So again, you realize that, if you were to go into the file and just change the image one day, a few weeks later down the track, you're going to run into a problem like this. So we need to structure our CSS to be able to account for that situation. So the way we can do that is, we know our headline div over here is green. Well, we know it's green. we know it's 60% width. So if we want to fill this space over here, what if we just make this image, say, 40% width? Then we know it's always going to make up the full width, isn't it? So 40%, save that. Let's go back. Ah, perfect. And obviously for mathematics, we know if we set that to 41, it's going to be too big, isn't it? It's going to be 101%. And that'll, oh, it's actually going to push out a little bit, but that's nothing to be worried about. But let's keep a 40% there, so we can actually keep our width as it is. But that's perfect. So now if I was to go into Photoshop and export the Space Dude image out to be a lot larger, it doesn't matter because we've actually set the width manually here. We've set it to always be 40%, and oh, yeah, we want to now set this back to 60%. There we go. That's why it wasn't working. Yeah, so we've got 60%, 40%, and therefore if I was to change that to even just 41, it'd be too big, and I've got the next line. Excellent. So just you can see the mechanics of how that works now. So there we go, 60 and 40, and we're pretty happy there. Pretty happy with that. All right, the next thing we need to do now is that, and this is why we use our color backgrounds, we've got our orange container, which is great, and that's the height of that is growing automatically depending on how much content we have in here, which is good. But we have our parent wrapping container, which is our section, which has a class called hero, the yellow area. It's not growing, is it? We've got that gap there. It should be automatic. But you remember when we first started off, we actually set a manual height. So I don't need that anymore. So I mean, you could just set height automatic, but that's interpreted automatically by default on the browser. So we don't actually even need to put that, and it'll always be automatic. Save that, go back and refresh. Excellent. Now you can see that the yellow area is going right to the bottom of our page. So we've got a real ideal situation here now. And obviously as we go smaller, we've got other issues to deal with, which will be dealt with when we go to the responsive lesson. But we've got a pretty good relationship between our space guy is over here, and he's set as a percentage width. Our headline's over here as a percentage width. And we've got a pretty good situation. So let's jump in and let's just fix up some of this this heading here, and let's just get this a little bit better. So I'm going to get rid of all that dummy text I put in there. There we go, that can go. So have a look back again. I think that maybe my padding at the top here needs a little bit bigger, so I'm going to set that to let's see, maybe 110 pixels. And another thing I realize is that this heading itself needs to be a lot bigger. So let's go to our design originally. Let's get back the font that it used to be. Let's go back in my undo history. Ah, there it is. Cool. Yeah, it's a lot bigger. So let's try something like. Well, first we actually need to make a new selector for the element, don't we? We're actually targeting the H1 here. So let's get into that first. So in order to target the H1, but we only want to target the H1 that's inside this headline div, don't we? So to do that, we'll go dot headline and we'll go H1. And let's set the font size to, let's say, 55 pixels. Save that, go back to Chrome and refresh. It's almost there. Let's go 48. And again, we could just tweak this in the actual Chrome inspector. And you'll see that world is kind of like a little infant, an orphan. So it's that the one word that sits on the line by itself. Which kind of looks a little bit strange in design, doesn't it? It'd be nice if it had two words there. Let's have a look back. Yeah, it actually goes from that to out this world, but we don't need to be too exact. We could actually even set that here with some padding, can't we? Or maybe instead of having our width to be 60%, let's have it set a little bit less, so it actually doesn't go all the way. So if we click our headline here we've got 6%. Let's bring it down a bit. There we go. Because I mean, you're always going to want a bit of a gap there, don't you? You don't really want it to be going right to the edge because it's too close to your image. So let's set it down to about, I don't know, let's say about 50%. That'll be fine. There we go. 50%. Refresh. Great. And we know that headline is going to be white, don't we? Based on the design here, it's white text. So we can set that now. We'll just go color, say white. All right. So we have that white set there for the heading. Let's just refresh that. There we go. Cool. So we're pretty happy there. And one thing we could probably start doing now is getting rid of all these block colors, can't we? Because we're pretty happy with how it's set up. And that's why it's important to have those set up at the start. So when we're actually got it to a point where we're happy, we can actually see where everything is, and we can now start turning those off. So let's get rid of our green for our headline. Let's get rid of our background color yellow for our hero. And actually, we'll leave the background color yellow for now. That's what we want to get rid of our orange on our container, like so. There we go. So we're getting a bit closer there. And one other thing we're going to do before I start setting the background image is, what we'll see here is our clouds we'll do right towards the end there. But I mean, we've got always a bit of a gap, don't we? I mean, our dude shouldn't really. I mean, I think there should probably be a little gap there, to be honest, so his fingers don't really touch the edge. I just think that's not really the best design. So I pretty much make sure that anything that's sitting inside my hero div, I want to have like a little bit of a gap at the top and probably a little bit of a gap at the bottom. Probably in the bigger gap at the bottom, to be honest. So let's jump in there and let's add that. So I mean, we know we want to add that to the whole hero, don't we? Because I mean, if we add it to the container, that would still work. But basically, we want basically anything that's inside this entire yellow section, our hero here, to have some padding on the top and bottom. So let's go and let's set that. So underneath we'll go padding on the top, let's say 15 pixels. Then the right value is nothing, because we don't want any padding on the left and right. And then the bottom, let's say 30 pixels. And we could just say 0 for the left, but if we leave it, if we don't put it in, it will take automatically what you've got for the right there. So that's pretty clever. Let's save that and refresh. That's better now. I've got that little gap there, and top and bottom. That's just looking a lot cleaner. So cool, we're getting there. So next thing we want to do is to add this starry background image. So what you'll notice is, first of all, what I'm going to do is just turn all these elements off first. So I'm going to hide him. There's our button. I'm going to hide that. There's our heading one. Hide that as well. So this is the background image we're dealing with. So what you notice is it really is, I mean, instead of us just grabbing the whole image like that and making a background image, in terms of performance, it's always good to have our images as small as possible. And what you'll see is that the background star image kind of repeats. It's a tile pattern, isn't it? So I reckon even if we just grab an area like this, for example, we could probably just grab that and make that as a repeatable image. So to copy it, instead of just going Command C, we want to copy merged, which is Shift Command C or Shift Control C on the PC. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go Command Shift C to copy merged. I'm going to go Command N to start a new file. And when you start a new file, once you've copied, Photoshop will always automatically bring in the height and width of whatever you just copied. So I'm going to Command V to paste it in, and there it is. So I'm going to save this for web, which is Command Alt Shift S, which is the save for web. And it's the same on PC, but instead of Command you press Control. And in this case, let's see how big the file size is if I go GIF. If I go GIF, it's going to be 2.5 kilobytes. That's down the left there. But if I go JPEG, even smaller, 1.928, so that's good. What about PNG, a bit bigger again, so it looks like JPEG's our best bet. Cool, so let's save this out as a JPEG, and on our desktop here, in our Kytte folder in images, we'll call this stars BG. I always just put -BG so I know it's a background image. It's always helpful to have your conventions there. Let's save that. Close that file, don't need to save it. And let's head back to our CSS file. So right now I've got our background image just set, well, our background set as a solid color yellow. We want to get rid of that. And just make sure you've got the word background here and not background color, because we're actually going to set the whole background as an image now. So to do that, we just type URL, and we do this normal brackets. Inside there we start some quotes, and it's basically asking us, hey, where is this image we're going to be using? So we know we're referring to our image which is inside the images folder. So first we need to put that folder name, images / and we called it stars-bg. If I just expand my images here, I can always just double check. There it is, yes, stars-bg.jpg. So let's do that. .jpg. Cool, go back and refresh. Excellent. There we go. And you'll see that when all we did was just say, hey, here's the image. And Chrome has automatically tiled it for us. You can see I mean, the image is only about that big, but it's tiled it across the x-axis and the y-axis as well. So no matter how big this section gets, it'll always tile it. So that's pretty cool. We could just leave it like that, but just to show you a little bit more CSS we can put in here just so you get more familiar with how the background property works. The next property it expects is, where is the left, where is this image coming from on the left axis. We'll say, hey, it starts at the very left, it's at the very top. Then you can set a repeat. So we're going to say, hey, this just repeats on both axes. We could be specific and say, hey, only repeat on the X or only repeat on the Y. But if you just use the word repeat, it will repeat across the whole lot. And the very last thing it's expecting is you can actually put in a color here as well. So a good thing about that is that, while this image is loading, say the person has a slow internet connection, as it's loading up, we could always just tell the browser that, hey, this actually has a general, the background color really is just that blue color, isn't it? So let's grab that. And one little pinpoint there, there's our color value. Select that and copy. Let's go back to the end here and just paste it in. But always remember when you paste in your colors that they should always have a hash. And you'll notice the difference in color, like this should always be a light blue. When it's not there, it's like a weird orange and a gray color. So yeah, always look for that color change there to make sure you've done it right. So let's save that, and if I refresh, you'll see nothing really would have changed because it's kind of interpreting all that by default. But if I was to say, set the repeat to only the y-axis, sorry, the x-axis, so I go to -x, refresh. Now you can see that the stars are only repeating along the x-axis, but down here it's just nothing, it's just that color. If I was to change that now to red, see what's going on? So that's just how the background property works. So that's important to be aware of. And the same, you can set it to repeat Y. Now it's only going up and down, but over here it's empty. So it's just good to be aware of that because you can use it to your advantage depending on what your design is. But we'll just keep it to repeat, which goes on all of them. Great. So there we go. That's our background image, which is repeating. And the last thing we want to do is to get it looking pretty close to what we've got in our design. Let's just bring these layers back again. Where are they? There we go. Is this button. That button probably shouldn't be there, really, should it? The button should probably be there. Looks more in balance. So, in order for this to look like a button, we also need to add some CSS to do that. So, let's go back to our HTML file. Find out where it is. There it is. Our check it out link. So, if we actually want to style this, we need to give it some kind of class, as we've always done. But given, if I just go back to design here, it seems like this is a kind of button style which we probably might want to use throughout the rest of the site somewhere else. So it'd make more sense if we just make a generic class for this button called button or something that then we could reuse. And that just saves us writing out the CSS multiple times. So let's do that. Let's go in and let's give this button a class name of btn. I could have called it button written in full English, but btn's nice and short, and not only that, but as you start building up bigger and bigger files, like if this class is being used all the time, it's creating extra bytes, kilobytes of information that just doesn't really need to be there. So in this case, we kept it really simple. It's just 3 letters. So let's copy that. Let's go into our style sheet. And where do we put it? We've got a whole list of all these things we've been making now, but really the button class is a generic class which is going to be used throughout the whole document. So let's put it towards the top. I always like to keep it in this kind of order. So we have our body, which sets the whole document. We have our headings, and let's put a new one called .btn. So let's see. The first thing we know, let's start with the basics, shall we? We know it's going to have a background color of this orange. So let's select the color picker and find out what it is. There we go. Let's copy that. So we go background, paste in that color. Cool. That's the first start. And we know the link text itself is going to be white, isn't it? So let's just set that color white, which is just FFF. Let's save that now. And let's go back to Chrome, just make sure we set it up properly. Cool, there we go. It's always good to do just a couple of basic styling first, just to make sure that this class name here and this class name here is spelled correctly, and to test to make sure it's actually working. So it's always good to do that. So we've got that working so far, and we'll see that our link, like all links by default, always have an underline, don't they? So we don't need that for this button, so let's remove that. So that's called text decoration. We'll set that to none. Save that. We also know that font weight is going to be bold. Font weight. Oops. That's going to be bold. Let's go back and refresh. Cool. Looking much closer now. Let's go back to our Photoshop design and see what else. Alright, in order for it to actually look like a button like this, we need to give it some padding on the left, right, or the right left, should I say, on the top and the bottom. So But the thing is, we know that this element here is an anchor tag, and those always display in line. And what we would have learnt from one of the labs I taught before is that the you can put padding top and bottom on here, but it's not going to function properly when it's sitting next to other elements. The padding will always overlap what's above it and below. So we actually need to set this to display inline block. So therefore we can actually set the padding and it's going to be interpreted properly. So we'll go display and we'll go inline block like that. Okay, and that means we can, once it has this property for display, we can now do some more cool things with it. We no longer are limited by display inline, because display inline is very limited and keeps things in line with each other, but you don't get that full control of being able to use widths and paddings properly. So let's set that, and now let's actually set our padding. So let's say padding, let's say on the top, what is it here? Probably about, I don't know, probably about 12 pixels or so. And then on the left and right, let's just say, I don't know, 28. Save that, go back and refresh. Hey, there we go. That's a lot better. Might set the top one a bit more now, say 14. And also I want to make the font size just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to say the font size set to 18 pixels should be fine. Refresh. Cool. Excellent. And the other thing to notice as well is that we've got some rounded corners here, don't we? So if we want to set that, we'll go border radius. And let's set that to, say, maybe 4 pixels. Give it a little bit of a curve. There we go. You'll see there it is, that nice little rounded corner there. Excellent. So I'm pretty happy with that so far. That's got us to a point where we've built our header, we've set a background image, but more importantly, we've learned how to actually set the layout. So we've actually got these areas set up properly so that we've got a div over here which has grouped all these together. We've got our image over here, and we've set the widths on those manually. So no matter how big the image is, no matter how big our Spaceman image is going to be, it's always going to be controlled. And it's always going to sit on the same line because they're both floated properly. Our container has overflow auto, so it actually picks up the height. See what happens when I turn it off. It seems broken, so that's very useful for us. And yeah, our hero is where we actually have the background image of the stars, and we've actually set some padding on the top and bottom for it to keep it all nice and balanced in there. So we're pretty happy with that overall. And probably the last thing I want to go through is, remember we created this container here and we set the width, remember? The key thing of that is that now if we ever want to change it, look what happens if I click inside here and use my up and down arrows on the keyboard, and just hover over as well. If I make it smaller, see the beauty of what's happening? Because it's set as a percentage width, obviously our heading's quite large there, but you can see now that our space image dude actually changes to the right width. See? So he's now no longer stuck at his native width. And obviously you can see if we made it down to 675 pixels, it's looking pretty good, but obviously our padding at the top here, remember our padding 110 pixels, that would then need to be adjusted. So we then now need to bring that down to about that or so. So I mean, instead of using a pixel width there, we should probably use a percentage, shouldn't we? Because I mean, what will happen is that if we use percentages, it's going to grow in proportion no matter how big we put the container or how small we put it. So let's just set that padding top there to be nothing for now. Actually, let's just refresh the whole site and get it back to how it was. So now, if I click my headline div, we'll see that this green area at the top here is our padding, which is 110 pixels. We don't really want a pixel value now. We want to set that as a percentage. So let's just reset that, and let's just start putting in some percentages and see what happens. So let's try 5%. Okay, that's cool. Before I go any further, so percentages when you're using vertical values, so here we're using obviously the top value, padding top of 5%. The percentage is actually taking the percentage of the width. So just a little bit confusing, but it's just something to be aware of. So this 5% value, which is that little gap there at the top, it's actually 5% of the width of the entire browser window right now. That's kind of how it works. So to know that, let's just set it a bit higher. You see some up and down keys. So cool. I reckon about 9% looks great. So let's go back now to our CSS. We're pretty happy with our button, so let's leave that. Scroll down, and what is that for? That's for our headline div, isn't it? So we can see here, there we go, headline. There we go, padding top 110%, sorry, 110 pixels. Let's change that to 9%. Save it, go back to Chrome, refresh, and there it is. And the key thing is now is that what you'll see, let's go back to our container before. Remember we have our 950 pixels, let's make it smaller. There we go. Now we can see our padding at the top here is growing proportionally. So everything's operating a lot nicer. Obviously once we get to a much smaller width, this giant H1 here is going to be a bit of a pain because the font size is quite huge. But you can see that our overall structure, how we've laid these two elements out, is working pretty good with that padding on the top there. So that's awesome. And also we could do the same also for our hero as well. You know, we've got our padding at the top of 15 pixels and 30 at the bottom. We could even put a percentage here. We could say 2%. On the bottom we could say maybe 4%. Give it those pixels. There we go. Fantastic. So I've got my container now, make that a little bit bigger. It's all growing proportionally, which is a lot nicer. And the key of this is that this is going to make your life a hell of a lot easier when you're doing responsive websites, which is what you should be doing these days. Meaning that as you change the width of the browser, simulating like an iPhone or a mobile device or a tablet, that everything's growing, all the widths are growing proportionally and the heights are growing proportionally. So if you set it up once correctly, it will look good no matter how narrow or wide the browser is. So whether it's a desktop computer, a tablet, or a phone, everything's going to grow in proportion, in scale. So that's really important when we come to making things responsive. And on that last note, I'm actually going to show you now that when we have this div called container here, setting a fixed width, we actually don't even need to go to that point. We can actually now set this as a percentage, and this is really going to help. So you'll see how this becomes responsive now. So let's actually put a background color on it. So I'm just going to double click there. I'm going to go background. I'm going to go orange again. See, there we go. And let's say instead of 843 pixels, let's actually set a percentage. Let's say 80%. Cool. And now, as you see, when I expand out, that's a lot better. That's going to grow right in proportion depending on how big our browser is, which is awesome. So I'm going to go and change that now. So you go back to my, here we go, 950, we don't need that anymore. 80% is much nicer. That's going to work more harmoniously with all browser widths. So refresh that. Cool. Much more dynamic solution that's going to look more in proportion and great on every screen size. Obviously as we get smaller we'll have to start reducing the font size of that. And you'll see right now as we get to a much smaller browser window, we've got our problem here with our header, which can no longer fit in that space at the top there, so it kind of sits down. But we'll tackle that when we look at the responsive class video afterwards. But yeah, so we're at a really good point now, guys. That's our header area working, and in the next video I'm actually going to go through and show you how to do layouts with display inline block. Because you'll notice here we've used floats, so this headline div over here is floated to the left and this image guy is floated to the right, and it's working for us. It's just that when you start getting down to smaller sizes, you'll start to see these little scroll bars appear on different browsers, and that's because we have this overflow auto. So this overflow auto is a good little hack. It makes things kind of work, but you do have some setbacks and some problems with it. So I'm going to actually show you a much better way to do layouts. Instead of using floats, we'll actually do display inline block. And you'll see it's actually pretty easy to understand, and we don't actually need to change too much with our code. We just need to drop in a few different values, and it kind of works automatically for us. So I'll show you how to do that in the next lesson. Cool.